Welcome to another Music Cafe. I have to say that this, besides my first interview ever that we did when we started the pandemic, this is the one that I'm more terrified about. So you can hear in the back, Rick is there. Um, Before I bring her in, I'm going to show the trailer of the last film that she did. She produced, she didn't direct. Actually, she directed because she always ends up directing everything she does. But here it is, The Accountant of Auschwitz.
I did feel sympathy for him. He looked like a pitiful old man. But that all changed the moment he sat down and he put his arms like that. I thought, you are the same Nazi, the same person who thought you were gods and we were vermin.
Prosecutors in Germany have now charged a 93-year-old man who was the accountant at Auschwitz.
Oskar Gröning collected goods. He collected the luggage of the people that would be brought to Auschwitz. He would skim through the luggage for valuables.
The first day, 11 Holocaust deniers came and they shouted out loud.
In Auschwitz hat es keine Vergasung gegeben. Auschwitz war kein Vernichtungslager.
After the Second World War, the German system didn't fail to prosecute Nazi war criminals. It deliberately decided not to prosecute.
Of the 6,000 or 7,000 guards who went through Auschwitz, about 100 or so were prosecuted.
How are you today?
Good, thank you. I'm good all the time.
Then all of a sudden, the prosecution in Germany changed the rules of the game.
There's slim pickings these days for Nazi war criminals. They got Gröning, they went after him.
Ach, kann ich schnell aus. Was erwarten Sie von diesem Prozess?
Freispruch oder was? Ich weiß es nicht.
If you punish a man of 93 for something that he did when he was 23, are you still punishing the person who did the crime?
I could tell there was not 1 ounce of meanness in his body.
This trial is a defining moment in the history of the Holocaust.
If we can send a powerful message that there is no statute of limitations on genocide, it could have an impact.
The Accountant of Auschwitz, one of the amazing films that my friend Ric Bienstock has done, and it's my pleasure to have Rick here. Hi, Rick. Thank you for joining me. I'm terrified of this one, I have to say. Let's set the ground rules. You can't abuse me, and you can't swear. So I don't know where this will go today. It's like
now I'm terrified.
There's not a lot. Rick, we've been friends for many years.
Many years.
And I don't know a lot about you. We've worked together in many, many films, but I don't know much about you. I know that you're the daughter of Holocaust survivors, born and raised in Montreal, and then you moved to Toronto. Why did you decide? I'm sure that's not what your parents wanted. Why did you decide to be a filmmaker, a documentary filmmaker?
Well, it was almost fluke. I was always interested in media, and really in those days, I never thought of myself as a filmmaker, to be honest, but I was just interested in media, and I did a film and communications degree at McGill, but like a long time ago, and it was all theory, so it was not practical whatsoever. So I thought actually I was going to go into law, and I did apply to law, and I got accepted, and then had an opportunity. I had just moved to Toronto. I was working with Simcha Yakubovich and this guy Henry Gold and Roger Pike, and Henry had ran an organization called CPAR, Canadian Physicians for Aid and Relief, and they did a lot of development projects in Africa. And at the time, he said, you guys should do a film. I mean, there's a little backstory to how I ended up working in Toronto, but you guys should do a film about development in Africa, what works, what doesn't, and that got funded. So I was either going to go to law at U of T or go to Africa for this very long shoot, because we had, very little money, I had practically no experience in documentaries. Roger had more experience, Simcha had some, and we went on 2 6-week trips, shot all across Africa, 8 countries across Africa, and it was just the most across Africa, and it was the most incredible experience that I ever had, because when you make films, you go into villages. You're not a tourist. You're speaking to people. And at the time, there were no cell phones. There was no email. So a lot of the research, we knew from Henry, who had these organizations, that there was this project in, let's say, Burundi or Rwanda or Malawi. But in terms of figuring out on the ground who you're going to interview, who you're going to talk to, exactly where you're going to film, you figured it out and did the research as you went. So basically, it was just this incredible experience of going into villages, figuring out what to shoot. And I was able to watch how that got made. And then I realized, I thought, I cannot believe this is a profession, much to my parents' chagrin. I deferred my going to law, and then, for a year, and then I deferred it indefinitely, and I still haven't gone back.
Well, it's good because you've done some amazing films. I mean, I have one here, right there, Ebola, which is, you've done 2 films about plagues. What possessed you? Like when people are running away from the viruses, you tend to go the other way. You've gone to Africa many times, but what went through your mind? I'm going, during an Ebola pandemic, which is, nothing short of terrifying.
Well, it's interesting because, at the time people said, "Oh, you're so brave," but that's actually not the case at all, because it's like either you feel the fear or you don't feel the fear. So we were cautious, but I just did not feel that fear. It seemed inconceivable to me that I could get Ebola. But what happened there, again, I had done a film called Misconceptions, and then Associated Producers called me because they were doing a film called The Plague Monkeys, and that was about historical Ebola outbreak and another virus, the Marburg virus, and it was based on a story by this guy Preston, Richard Preston, I think, on the hot zone, where a group of lab monkeys who were infected with Ebola were found in Reston, Virginia. So that was the story they were doing, and it's like nobody knew that there was Ebola in America. But I went to Africa, and again, I love shooting in Africa. It's one of those where everything's impossible. So possible. You're winging it. You're figuring out stuff on location. And I felt that I thrived in that environment. And the first outbreak in the 70s was in Zaire at the time, in a place called Yambuku. And so it was almost impossible to get to Yambuku. But I go 2 weeks ahead and figure it out. And we got this story. And that film actually won an Emmy. So I directed all of the African stuff, and I directed that stuff in Germany. And then I went and finished my other film while Elliot edited the cut and Simpa. And then, interestingly, Glenn Close, the actress Glenn Close, her dad is a physician. And he was Mobutu, who was at the time the dictator of Zaire. He was Mobutu's doctor. So he was in Zaire in the 70s at the time of this outbreak, and he was helping us a lot in terms of information and connections and just facts about that outbreak. And around a year and a half after Plague Monkeys, he called and said, "You're not going to believe this. There's an outbreak of Ebola in Zaire now." And I'm like, holy moly. I mean, Simha and Elliot, of course, it was under Associated Producers, but it was like, I knew everything there was to know about Ebola. I knew the players, I knew the virus, I knew it wasn't airborne. And it was like, how fast can I get there? So when you say, you're right, people want to flee, I was like, oh my God, I could not get on a plane fast enough. But it was very hard to find a crew. And there was not a lot of people, surprisingly, who wanted to go. And we ended up, and also, it's not just going into the virus. What was challenging about it, was more challenging, is how do you get there? How do you get into the interior of Zaire, into the bush? Where do you live? What do you eat? How do you find a place to stay? I mean, that was the stuff. And, so I generally produce this stuff too. I don't just direct it, but at the time, the World Health Organization and Médecins Sans Frontières had, and CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, they had flown in right away. And so, I mean, we're really talking about a village. There's no hotels. There's a couple of little places to stay, and they were all taken up. Even any private residences were taken up by those organizations. And really, people in that area live in huts. It's not a city. They live in huts with no running water and no electricity. So I found an abandoned house with the help of a missionary that I had contacted because I had previously been in Zaire, an empty house that had once belonged to an expat. So it had no windows. It was completely deserted, but it had structure, and it had electrical outlets, but there was no electricity. But I brought a generator in anticipation. And so we hooked this house up to a generator. I had mosquito nets, and we had the most amazing, it was clean. We hired someone there. So, I mean, we ended up, I think, once eating dog food by mistake because we couldn't, there was no label on the can. Food was an issue. But we were at the epicenter of that epidemic for 5 weeks. And we were the only ones actually who were inside the Ebola ward filming inside the ward, because of course the CDC, they didn't want to let anybody in the ward. But I think after, because so much media kind of pounced onto Kikwit, Zaire, but they were leaving or flying back to Kinshasa every night. We didn't have the budget for that. But also I think they realized that we were doing a serious film, not a news bit, and that we would kind of respect the issue, and we did that. I mean, I'm very proud of that film because I think it really gives you a sense of how you contain an outbreak in an environment that is has no running water, no electricity, no radio, no newspapers. How do you contain? What do you do? So we really went in and broke that. I could talk. Sorry, I can ramble a lot. You ask one question and then an hour's
fine.
gone.
That's the idea. But I mean, on many of the films, you worked as a hired gun, but some of your best work comes somehow to you. I mean, you've done films that are deeply impactful and relevant to the human condition. You did Sex Slaves. We have the trailer here as well. You did Human Organ Trade. Like things that really demonstrate how, on one side, how terrible the world can be. On the other side, the opposite. How do these films end up on your lap?
Well, I mean, I have to actually give credit. I mean, I'm very drawn to the dark side of things. So, I'm doing stories that I don't do personal stories, right? I do other stories, but every film has a different trajectory. The sex trafficking was, believe it or not, I was doing a series, Penn and Teller. It was called Penn and Teller's Magic and Mystery Tour, and we took Penn and Teller, these Las Vegas magicians who are terrific, and we brought them to Egypt, India, and China. It was 3 episodes. And when we were in China, and I worked with a producer, Felix Golubev, who we fight like siblings, but we're actually a very good team on the ground. You know Felix as well. We're a very good team on the ground. And he has the same nose for story. But anyway, we were in, so Penn and Teller is a very light film, and I was hired to do that, and it was pretty fun. It was very different for me working with magicians, but still, everything I do has been overseas, and so it's always interesting, the logistic part of it. Anyway, we were in China, and Felix and I travel ahead, as we always do, because you have to figure out where people are going to stay and what's going to happen. And when you're with a documentary crew, you can stay in pretty crappy places. But with Penn and Teller, we had to make sure that the place was going to be at least decent. It's not like they needed 5-star, but we were going really deep in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of a village. So we found this hotel that looked kind of like a Holiday Inn, and it made no sense that there was that kind of hotel in that area. But we were thrilled, so we booked the rooms and came back a few weeks later with Penn and Teller and the entire crew, only to discover that the hotel was a brothel, and it was used as a brothel, servicing like local government, and so while we were there, of course, they were constantly calling our rooms. Do you want a massage? Do you want a massage? Like we had to pay the mama to not call.
Not to call.
But we went into the basement. There was a discotheque in the basement, and we went in, and there was really a sea of prostitutes, Chinese prostitutes, because we were in China, and a blonde woman, and we were so curious, like, who's this Caucasian woman? And we went to talk to her, and she was Russian, and Felix speaks Russian. And she explained to us that she was trafficked there. She was brought to to China from Russia by a Russian-speaking pimp. She was told she was going to be working as a domestic cleaning hotels, not a domestic, but cleaning hotels, and they took her passport and she was trafficked. I had never heard of trafficking like that before. We were apoplectic. And we said, well, we'll call the police. And she said, you can't call the police. The police use our services. And we're in the middle of a shoot. And we kept saying, well, what can we do? And she just kept saying, there's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do. We left. It was haunting us. We tried to call back that hotel and find her. She was gone. And that was what, that actually triggered the film Sex Slaves, because there has been trafficking from all sorts of countries. But since the breakup of the Soviet Union, all of these former Soviet bloc countries were completely and utterly impoverished. And so many of these women, these Russian women, were the new kind of it girls in the world of trafficking. And we decided to do that story. And again, it was Felix and I went on location, and we were, I went to Ukraine multiple times for research. And it turns out that everything that we filmed was stuff that Felix and I did on location, because there were so many roadblocks, and the police said they'd work with us, but they weren't really working with us. We had to go rogue to get our story, and then we got an incredible story where we followed a husband to Turkey because his wife had been trafficked. And
let me show the trailer of this movie, because that was one of the last movies we did with Imarion at the time, the post-production facility. And I want to show, because you won multiple awards as well for this film. So let's show Sex Slaves.
This man's wife has been sold for $1,000 to one of Turkey's most notorious and violent sex traffickers.
Дай мне искать, дайте мне искать их поговорить.
Она сейчас не возле нас.
А где? Она вчера говорила ясно, я хочу ее убить. Вот так она говорила в камеру, я хочу ее убить.
His only hope of ever seeing Katya again is to pretend to be a trafficker himself and try to buy her back.
Сели и поговорили. Я обещаю, с моей стороны ничего не будет.
If he fails, she will be trafficked through Europe and disappear into a life of sexual slavery.
Он говорит, что он тебя не доверяет.
Ну, скотина, блин. Именно, блин, я их ненавижу, я вам передать.
When you say that you don't make personal stories, I'd like to defer. That doesn't get much more personal than telling the story of these people that, literally in the 20th century getting trafficked all over the place.
Yeah, no, I mean personal about myself, but that was a very heavy. I mean, we were in Ukraine mostly. I mean, we filmed in many places, but we were in Ukraine, and we ended up having to keep extending the shoot because the story just kept unfolding in the most incredible, crazy way. And the crew, it was Felix and myself, and my camera guy, Mike Grippo, and Peter Sawadi was my sound man. It was 4 of us. And they were definitely part of the team because the story was unfolding in real time. We were constantly reassessing what we should do. We were hardly sleeping because every time I'd say, tomorrow's not going to be such a long day. I promise you we'll be able to relax. And then we'd find out, oh my God, this woman Pasha seems to be taking some domestics. You've got to get to the port right away. So it never happened. And we could not, I mean, it was really, there was no way we could have done that film without this incredible crew who participated. Also in hidden camera, we had a lot of hidden camera. We went with a lot of gear. It was the first time I ever did that. Felix wore some. I had a hidden camera in my purse. We did a lot of that kind of stuff, and we were and Mike Grippo and Peter Sawade we were duplicating our tapes every night because we were so scared that our footage would be taken. And we always have dummy tapes of footage that's like just touristy footage, so that and we've been stopped before, and people stop and go, take your tape out of your canvas tape at the time, and Grippo would know to switch it, and then we'd give them this dummy tape. We'd always say that we're just filming touristy thing, and then we touristy things, and then we snuck into Transnistria, which is part of Moldova, which is just really at the time, it's a self-declared republic in Moldova. It's not recognized by the UN, but they have their own currency. The president was called President Smirnov. Like you couldn't write this stuff; it wouldn't seem realistic. And we snuck in. We had our cameras in the sides of the van, and when I think back, it was very, very crazy. And we told them we were going in because so many Westerners go and buy or bring brides back, right, from Moldova, by kind of Russian brides or Moldovan brides, that we said we were going for that because we had our Canadian crew. So that's how we got into Moldova, and a little, so anyway, all of these, you get all this footage. But the thing about sex slaves was that there was not, at the time, I mean, now there's been a lot of material. At the time, there was almost nothing about sex trafficking, certainly nothing substantive. And when I realized that women it seemed inconceivable to me. You traffic a woman, you take away her passport. Why doesn't she yell? Why doesn't she run away? Why doesn't, like, all the normal things you think, there's no way that they don't know what's happening. There's no way they don't know what they're doing. So I was very curious to understand how this was happening. And then when you're in Turkey and in Ukraine and Moldova, and by the way, those aren't the only countries that we went to. We shot in England and in Canada. They were, women were kept captive here as well, and in England. You take away a woman's passport because she helps you get into that country illegally. She lies to customs, to Turkey, because she's going to be working, she thinks, as an illegal domestic. So she lies. So she knows that she's there illegally, and you take that under threat. You threaten them. It's not obvious, people who come, especially from countries where the police are extremely corrupt, that they would go to the police. It's just not an obvious thing to them.
It can't happen.
It just can't happen. Also, very often, the traffickers at the grassroots level know who their families are. So they threaten and say, you have a small daughter. If you want her to be safe, you keep doing this. So it's so evil and so heinous that I just felt it was really important to tell that story. And it's not only telling the story. Of course, when you make films like that, you want to bring it to the public's attention so that there's some change. And I was ecstatic that the film was used. I spoke at RCMP conferences, at Secret Service, CIA, FBI, because they wouldn't understand if they would raid a brothel and they ask, are you trafficked? Everyone would say no. And there wasn't a lot of material about the psychology at the time. Now they're much more attuned. So they asked me to speak. I mean, not that I was such an expert, but having met so many trafficked women, I had a little bit of insight. So I did a lot of speaking engagements. I was invited to address the judiciary in Greece, because it's a big problem in Greece. I went to Cyprus to talk to the media there under the auspices of the U.S. State Department. The U.S. State Department got the rights to the film. So I just felt that that there was fullness to it. The OESC, I always get that mixed up, the Organization for Security and Economics in Europe. It's based in Vienna. I spoke there about trafficking and the media's responsibility. So, I mean, that's what you hope to do with documentaries. That, I mean, of course you want to make a film and you want people to watch it, but when you can have a tiny bit of an impact, and it's tiny, but it's incremental, but it was, I'm very proud of that film and the team. I couldn't have done it without Felix. Simcha produced, and it was an incredible crew, incredible.
Ric, you've won and been nominated first and then won basically every major award in documentary. There's you winning the Emmy. I mean, it doesn't really get bigger than that, but you've won, the Geminis, really every award you have. You've been recently appointed to the Order of Canada, so now I don't know if I have to vow to you or how to address you. That would be proper. Yes,
mine is fine.
And you've directed, literally directed, some of the most famous people in the world. You just finished directing Samuel L. Jackson, which is not a small thing to do. And when I usually interview musicians, I also ask them this question. Those are very important moments in your life. You're, with the creme de la creme in filmmaking, but that probably doesn't define you at all. Not the awards and not the stars. So what defines you?
That's a really hard question because that's a complex question. I'm a mother of two incredible kids. I'm, a wife. I don't know, I sometimes think that I do define myself a lot by my work because it's not, I tell this to my kids. There's jobs and then there's, I don't know what to call careers. And if you're lucky enough, you're doing something that actually is satisfying in and of itself. You have to earn money to live. We all have to earn money to live. And there's many people who have jobs and they're decent jobs, but they're not passionate and their life is outside of their job. And mine is both. Both my family and my job give me enormous amount of pleasure. So I don't know. For a long time, I did define myself by what I did. I wanted to, this is very complicated, but maybe many times I need to see a shrink, which I haven't done yet, but it's never too late. But I think, and I've seen this before, my mother was in Auschwitz, and I did not want, when I was little, I just wanted to be a Canadian. Like, I am Canadian, but I didn't understand, I didn't even know that my mother had an accent until someone said something about my mother's accent. I said, my mother doesn't have an accent. Well, she talks like Jaja Gabor. She's passed away now. But I think it's almost like you want to prove that it was worth surviving the Holocaust. Like, you have this need to succeed, whether it's financial or in other ways, if you're doing artistic endeavors. And I see that in a lot of children. It's not reserved for children of Holocaust. I'm not saying that, but I do see that a lot. And I felt like I have to show you, like, I want you to be happy. I want you to be proud. I want you to feel like it was, So sometimes I think that was a driver. And it's interesting because, Geddy Lee of Rush is a child of Holocaust survivors. Jeannie Becker is a child of Holocaust survivor. I am stunned every time, I read somebody else who is just, who's outstanding in their field and who is a child of Holocaust. Now, I've never done the numbers, but it just like, I'll read, I can't remember, somebody else I just read, I'll try and remember, who it just said, I can't believe they're also a child. There weren't that many, and,
Survivors.
there weren't that many survivors. And so I don't know if that's it, but it's definitely there. You don't grow up in a house where people survive such a horror. And of course, we never had, I never had grandparents, or, I had one uncle. So, you don't have a lot of extended family. And so you just got to make, it's a different relationship to the world a little bit. It's hard to explain. I don't wear it all the time. I don't walk around. I'm not sad all the time, but it's there somehow.
As a documentary filmmaker, I'm very specific as a documentary filmmaker, and you're also in the unique position that you're in, that particular generation of very few people who are, the daughter of Holocaust survivors. So combining both, what is your responsibility to, to show what happened and make sure that this doesn't happen, although it keeps happening? Do you feel any responsibility because of your journalistic background to show that evil?
I had a little guilt about that because that's what I said before. All the films I made, Ebola, sex trafficking, trafficking in human organs, porn, Penn and Teller. I did a film on boxing, corruption in the world of boxing. These have nothing to do with my life, my personal life. And I actually stayed away from it. I just didn't want to explore. It's not it was too emotional, too hard. And then it's interesting because Ricky Gerwitz came to me with The Accountant of Auschwitz, which was a film that she had wanted to make, and she quit CTV to make that film. It was a news story, and then brought on Matthew Scheuchert, and she came to me to help because she had not made a feature-length doc before, and I actually resisted for a very long time. And then when I finally succumbed to, I really embraced it and felt, well, maybe this is the film I make. I mean, it's not about my parents, but there are several survivors in the film. When they tell their stories, I could barely listen, and I have a lot of. I wonder sometimes, should I have made something, but it was way too close to home for me, and so I haven't made it my work to do stuff about that, but I did that, and I hope and I hope that film has an impact in its own realm, because that's more about post-war justice. It's not just telling the story of the Holocaust. But no, it's interesting that you asked that, because I did not go that route. Some people do tell very personal stories, but I don't really want to reveal myself that much.
Working with Simcha, you've produced a lot of films about the Holocaust. You did, before this film, you did The Good Nazi. But this was really the first film where you're like, not heavily involved with the story because it's not your story, but your parents were in Auschwitz. It must be, very emotional, and it's an emotional movie. Even in the little part that I participated creating it, it's really emotional. It's hard to watch, and we watch it over and over and over again.
Yeah, you do watch it over and over. Well, again, like, we felt that we wanted to. I mean, Ricky again came with the story that she wanted to look at the ethics of. I mean, we use the accountant of Auschwitz as a. I mean, the film is not only about the account of Auschwitz; it's about post-war trials and guilt and how far down the line is somebody guilty if you just watched. But I will tell you, there are a lot of parallels to what's going on in the world today. And when you say, you want to make sure it won't happen again, I mean, forget about what's going on in the States even, which I'm not suggesting that it's Holocausty, but it's certainly divisive, and it's people getting divided across really ideological lines that are sometimes crazy. But even in other countries, we are standing by the Rohingya, there's so many. There have been so many subsequent genocides that I don't feel like we've learned anything. And we, meaning the population of the world, but also, even if we have learned, you realize it's always like, how could the world have stood by? How could the world have stood by? But how are we going about our day when these horrible things are happening in other countries? They're just, they're on the other side of the world for us. And you realize, just as a citizens, that you're kind of helpless. You can protest in front of an embassy, you can donate some money, and hope that your government does something, but you're pretty helpless. You just kind of go about your day. And the realization that it's banal how we can sit by where horrible things are going on. We look at Syria, right? I mean, it's just, you step back, it's kind of shocking that while we're doing this, somebody on the other side of the world is cowering in fright that their 3-year-old's going to be. I mean, I can't even think about it, and it's going to make me cry.
When you see it on the news, sorry.
Barbara Walters, you like to make people cry, but
I don't. People cry because you ask a question. When you see the news, I know we're removed, and there's very little what we can personally do. As you say, we can go and protest or donate, call 1-800, whatever. But does it trigger anything in you that says, maybe that's something I should be doing? Do you think about it? There's potentially a film to make. I mean, you won the Amnesty International Award as well.
Yeah, that was for the organ trade film. So I think, yeah, no, I do. I mean, everything, that's the thing when you make documentaries. Not only do people often have ideas for you, like, you should make a doc about this, but anytime there's anything in the world. And sometimes, again, the media has changed quite a bit. So with sex trafficking, I felt I was there was not a lot of material. I did a film on pornography. I mean, I know it wasn't an ethical film, but at the time it was before cable. Nobody had seen how that world really operated. So I felt I was ahead of the curve. Now, with when when all these boats were capsizing, filled with Syrian refugees, I'm sure every single documentary maker. I mean, that there's a real story there. And then I saw that there were so many solid people doing those stories that were just faster than me. They just, and I didn't have a particular like I know this person, so I didn't go seek it out. I mean, you're right. Sometimes you're drawn to do that, but if you're going to do something that's absolutely current, like you have to be there just faster.
In the moment.
And I'm more, I mean, the stuff that I've done is a little bit more investigative, where I'm trying to get inside something to, to really understand it. So the organ trafficking film was a very different beast, because there's a lot of films about organ trafficking. And actually, Simcha came to me with that project, and I didn't want to do it. I was very resistant to it, because I thought, okay, I don't want to do something where there's a lot of good material out there already. In fact, this woman, Rama Rao, who's Canadian, was making a film on the organ trade at the same time, initially unbeknownst to us, and her film was very good. But what then made it interesting was when I talked to people who had purchased organs, and I understood the ethical dilemma, and that it wasn't as actually, Rama didn't do this in her film, but many other projects, it's always the poor victim and the horrible trafficker. And there's so much more to this story, which, again, I just want to say for the record, Rama also explored the ethical issues around it.
Yeah.
But that there was so much more to this story, and that it was so interesting, because I started going, what would I do? What would I do if my kid needed a kidney, for example, because most of the organ trade is kidneys, and it wasn't a match. The interesting thing about the organ trade, just in terms of kidneys and livers a little bit, is that if you donate, you're a hero, but if you sell or if you buy, you're a pariah. And that's what made it intellectually interesting for me. I mean, of course, you can't organ traffic a heart because that kills somebody. But they're in a very extreme cases. In India, people have sold their corneas or their eye. I mean, there's no question. No, that's unethical. It's disgusting. It's horrible. It's illegal. But when it comes to the organ trade, there's so much gray area to explore. And that became, for me, like I hung on to that and then realized I want to follow one operation from the beginning to the end. The donor, the purchaser, the surgeon, like the line of that. And that was really hard. And Felix and I did that. And I think, by doing that, and we found the surgeon who was wanted by Interpol. I flew to Turkey to have a coffee with him to convince him to be in the film, which he ultimately agreed to do. And we tracked down the donor who donated to our specific Canadian guys. So by parsing out that story, you really get a sense of what motivated the guy who needed one. Well, he wanted to live, and he hoped that all the money he was paying was going to help some impoverished person. The impoverished person, what motivated them? They needed the money desperately. What's wrong with saving a life and getting money? The surgeon, people say, well, it's just money for him, but this guy's
caught in the middle.
He's called Dr. Frankenstein, but you can not believe him or believe him, but he is one of Turkey's top surgeons. So he would make a decent living without having to go black market and risk imprisonment. So from his point of view, and from this incredible Dr. Zaki Shapira, who is reviled, these guys are reviled. When I met with them, I mean, I'm not naive. I'm not suggesting that money isn't a factor, but you have to understand, if you're risking prison, they're moving these operations from Estonia to Azerbaijan to all these places to bring in people who are desperate for a kidney. They're making decent money, but it's not They're not making $1 million an operation, So I think they are partly motivated by what they see as an unjust system. Anyway, all of this, having said that, I interviewed people from the World Health Organization. I understand how ethically compromised it is, but it was a very interesting subject to explore.
It fascinating, the topics that you cover. I have a couple of questions. We're 40 minutes into it already, and the questions keep coming to my head. When you did the pandemic films, you were not married and you didn't have kids, so you can run around the world and whatever happens. But now, when you do like the latest films, like sex trade and human trafficking, organ trafficking, sorry, you were already married with kids, and you're in imminent danger. Do you ever think about that when you're making the film?
Well, I mean, I don't really feel that it's that dangerous. Like, I haven't felt that I'm in imminent danger. I mean, there were some moments during the making of sex. Yeah, I guess. I mean, there's some moments that you can construe as potentially dangerous, but I never felt my life was in danger. I mean, I couldn't do this without a very supportive husband at home. Supportive meaning, I mean, we had to have a nanny because he also worked in production. But when I traveled, you have to have someone who supports that. But I never thought my life was in danger. More than anything, my big concern was just leaving the kids is hard. It's hard doing that. And, again, technology is much better now, but it was, talking to them on the phone. Like, I remember being undercover, and it was Halloween, and I was missing Halloween, and that's a big thing for little kids. So, I'm undercover in Turkey in a van, and then I'm going, what are you wearing for Halloween? That kind of thing. It just that, motherhood doesn't, that was the hardest part. It's just, and my kids could never see any of my films, obviously. So it was just this void for them of me kind of disappearing length of time, but not like the old days. But anyway, would I do an Ebola film again? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, actually, because I just never felt I was in such imminent danger.
Well, now we have our own pandemic going on, which has affected literally everyone. Production has been impacted severely. I mean, like the production community, and in my world as well, the music community has been really having a hard time, and a very, very complicated moment. You made another movie that you don't talk a lot about it, The Age of Anxiety. And I wanted to touch that before we end up today, because COVID has really exacerbated the problem of anxiety. Like, we are all very anxious, very nervous. Either we accept it or not, but we are. Going to the office is complicated. Doing, the little thing, going to the supermarket, you need to wear a mask. We're all very anxious. The political situation, not only in the United States, but across the world, I think that has, made it even more difficult. Tell me more about anxiety and how.
Well, The Age of Anxiety, I was directed by Scott Harper, who did a great job, but that was based on a book. I have a good friend, Patricia Pearson, who is an author and a journalist, and she wrote this book, Anxiety, Yours and Mine. I think I'm having a mental blank. Anyway, she approached me about doing a documentary, and at the time, it's interesting because I think, to be honest, if we made that film again together, we would make it slightly different, because anxiety, but at the time, again, it was at the forefront of it. When we grew up, did anybody say, I have anxiety or I'm anxious? It was not a word that was so commonly used in universities. Like, it wasn't anxiety. Anxiety is an issue now. It's an illness now. It wasn't when I grew up. I mean, I'm not saying people didn't feel anxious. I just mean it was not categorized. You didn't think anxiety, if you were anxious about an exam. But now anxiety is it's something else. I mean, we know also it's not just COVID. It's social media. It's our phone. I mean, we're just, kids are wired differently now. So the COVID anxiety, I mean, I cannot put myself in the shoes of someone who is younger. I don't quite, because I'm okay to work at home for a while and to talk to friends on Zoom, friends who I've hung out with for decades. But for my kids they're not shut-ins, they're seeing people, I mean, especially in the summer, but not a lot. Their whole work world is different. I mean, look, Alex, you and I met while working. We're sitting in a room together, hanging out, doing online schmoozing, eating, and that's how we became friends. If we were onlining and working from a distance, we would just be doing the work, saying, hi, how are you? How's your day? And that's it. We would never get to know each other if we hadn't, we work as teams. So I think all the friendships that have blossomed from my work world and my adult life would be very different if I was doing it through Zoom. And so I just worry about, when you talk about anxiety, that's impacting the next generation. You have a son too. I have 2 kids. They're doing fine, but I do worry about them. And more, even so many jobs now are computer oriented, software developer, social media, and all of that. That's a lot of the younger jobs, and they're isolation kind of jobs to begin with. And if you're not working in an environment, in an office, then where's your human contact?
Where's the social component of social media?
Exactly. Where is the social component? And because of the financial cost of having offices, now because of this, people are realizing, I can do a lot of stuff remotely. I don't have to keep an office downtown for $50,000 a month or $100,000. Like, I can have half my staff work, in the office, and half work at home, permanently. And I am concerned about where we're going. But the age of anxiety at the time, I thought it was very interesting because we're very pill, especially Americans, pill oriented. I mean, remember the days of Prozac? Anybody who felt anything was just given an antidepressant. And we were trying to explore that. And Patricia had her own personal experience with that, where she was put on a pill and then tried to get off of it very quickly. And she had a horrible reaction to it. And then she started this investigation that we did in the film, which is, what is this new way of just prescribing pills for every emotion? And that's where, but I thought, again, that film was ahead of its time, but that's thanks to Patricia and Scott Harper.
It's listen, talking about crying, I've been through depression in my life, and I know that is what doctors do when they prescribe you medication, and it is a huge problem because, I felt my mood going up and down, and I went through a very complicated period about 10 years ago, which fortunately I'm coming out of as we speak. But and there is a component that you need the social net. No, and I'm not saying social media or the network, the actual social net to help you carry you out of these problems. That is something that is really not addressed. And we joke about going to the shrink and whatnot, but it's true. You need that, and that came to mind this week because CAMH here in Canada has been doing a very, very intensive campaign about suicide. The numbers are staggering. I didn't know until I saw one of the ads this week that 800,000 people commit suicide a year worldwide. It's a number that I would never think of.
Well, it's interesting because I just watched a film called The Social Dilemma on Netflix, and the suicide rate has increased exponentially with social media, particularly among young people, and the age of suicide has gone down. And I didn't know that either. It's so funny that you say that this week, because I literally just watched the film this week, and it made me gasp because it's so connected to I believe, this technology that has been a force for good and we all understand that it's a force it's a really dangerous force, and we don't know, and it's uncontrollable. It's absolutely uncontrollable. So there have been, again, that's a great topic. There's a lot of films on that, and I think there's a lot of, I was going to say, there's a lot of topics that are the most important topic to deal with. One of the things I'm trying to do now, well, we just finished working with Simcha and Felix and you and Sarah Sapper, who is the UK co-producer on a 6-part series about the transatlantic slave trade. That was with Samuel L. Jackson. So that was a big TV project. That's, very big in scope, and that is coming to an end. And I would like, and I've been wanting to make a film about a free speech on campus. And I started that like 3 years ago, and I kept saying things are really not good. In terms of students engaging with opinions that they don't agree with. And of course, this year has been explosive in terms of scared to say anything. And so I have to revisit. It's a very tough film to make. It's very controversial. It's a topic that people are scared to touch. But I think along with social media issues, it's one of the most important issues of our day, because people are actually self-censoring out of fear of not being accepted or being canceled, or
very, very complicated times.
Yeah.
Any other projects on your plate that you can talk about?
Those are Enslaved. I'm just finishing Enslaved and Speechless, and I have a bunch of small things in, like when I say development, that just means it's an idea that's been written down into a page. But I do have some other ideas, but really so much of the work that I had planned to do involves, quite a lot of travel. And travel is very different now. You can't, we cannot bring a crew to a country where we have to be in quarantine for 2 weeks. It's unaffordable. So, never mind that you have to raise the money to make these films. It's not like I could just pick up and go. But production, as you know, because it's impacting you, is very bespoke. Like, you have to really figure out how to do it.
The logistics are, I just came back from the US, and it was like, forget about the quarantine, which I knew I would have to be in this 4 walls for 14 days without doing anything. Fortunately, the technology allows me to work. But, the logistics of getting onto a plane with equipment and crew, it's very, it's taxing. You get there, you're exhausted of a travel of 4 hours that you used to do every other day. So it's complicated.
So that's complicated. And then, just simply adhering to kind of best practices when you're on the set. And then, I haven't even wrapped my mind around it, but because I'm not, because I'm in post-production. But if I had to, the other problem with the Speechless film is I had intended to film on campuses. Well, campuses in the States are going, and now COVID rates are going up. It's not free speech is not the topic on campus this year.
Right.
It's COVID. So our world is changing rapidly, and it's just like you said, it's a complicated time, and I hope that I'm just more worried for my kids, really, when I think about it. I'm not so worried about myself.
We're getting to that age.
Also, my puppy. I have a puppy now. We're getting to that age.
There you go. We're getting to the age of the puppy.
The puppy age, exactly.
Exactly. Ric, I can't thank you enough for agreeing. It took me a while to convince you to come on MusiCafe. And everybody asked me, how come? Nothing about music, but it's, delightful to speak to you. You're a wealth of information. And I wanted to tell you publicly, because most people don't do it, and I do get the opportunity to thank you for allowing me to work with you. Your projects are amazing, although we fight all the time, and you make my life miserable and very complicated, and you swear at me and you abuse me. I'm a victim. I'm a victim of you. But it is a pleasure to work with you. I've been lucky enough to fall into this career by chance, by mistake. Simcha embraced me the first time I met him at a synagogue. and he brought me in, made me part of the team, and then I started working with you and with Felix, and it's been a really, I get paid to do it, which most people would do it for free. I even get paid to do it, and it's a joy. Thank you for giving me the opportunity of working on some of your films and the opportunity of being the receiver of your friendship and your family's friendship as well. It's really a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure to torture you as much as possible.
I know.
Which
I know.
No,
See, I'm a
but
specialist on making myself cry too.
No, I know that's true, but I will say, Alex, like we do. It's not like we fight. We just like we're. I mean, I'm blunt. I'm pretty blunt, but I trust you implicitly, and you know that, and I have a lot of respect for your work and your work ethic, and you've always delivered, always, and. So it's very nice to find someone you work with who's your friend, but also you like their work. That doesn't always happen, right? There's a lot of people you like, but they might not. So I think it's been official that way.
Thank you very much. Don't go. Stay a couple of minutes after we stop the stream. This coming week is very weird because the Jewish holidays are coming, so MusiCafe will be at odd times. So I can tell you that I will be recording with the conductor and music director of the COC. We're doing a very, very small piece in Wellington. So I will have Johannes Debus. Hopefully we will have a little conversation as well. And I have a recommendation of the week, which is the first recommendation of the week. If you go to Philharmonia Orchestra's website, Nicola Benedetti will be playing, conducted by Paavo Järvi, The Lark Ascending. It's a fantastic piece of work by Vaughan Williams. Go to their website. I don't get paid to do that. It's a fantastic piece of work. I highly, highly recommend it. I saw it today on social media. Watch it. It's beautiful, and she's a fantastic violinist. And Paavo, of course, a great conductor who I've had the opportunity of interviewing before. Ric, again, thank you very much. Thank you all for spending your morning with us. We'll see you next time.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.